Hello everybody! Today we're going to be talking about the rotator cuff. So this is a very commonly injured structure in a lot of people, rotator cuff tears. That's why I want to cover it. So it is comprised of four muscles. I memorized it by the acronym SITS. So S-I-T-S, S standing for supraspinatus, I infraspinatus, T for teres minor, and the last S is subscapularis. So these four muscles are key in stabilizing the shoulder joint. Over here, I've drawn the posterior view of the right shoulder. And the main job of the rotator cuff is to keep the humeral head inside of the glenoid cavity. For the anatomy purposes, this is called the glenohumeral joint, aka the shoulder joint that we think of. Gleno, meaning the glenoid cavity, which is that concave portion of right here of the scapula, right? Where the humeral head sits, aka the glenohumeral joint. So it makes sense. So these four muscles are very responsible for keeping the humeral head inside the actual glenoid cavity nice and strong. And the two most important parts that they pull are the rotator cuff pulls in, so meaning the humeral head gets pulled into the glenoid cavity, and down. So this is also very important. So a lot of the muscles like infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscap actually have a force vector that when they pull on their attachment on the humerus, which is our long bone here, into the shoulder joint, it pulls it down. So that's actually really important to keep the humeral head from migrating upwards to prevent bony structures like the greater tubercle out here from hitting the acromion during shoulder abduction when you raise your arm like this. So it's very important that it does pull down. So if it doesn't, if it's a weak rotator cuff or you have motor control issues, it can lead to certain conditions like shoulder impingement or rotator cuff tears. The most common rotator cuff to get torn is the supraspinatus, just because of how it arches over that humeral head. All right, so welcome to this side of the video here. So the program that I'm going to be using to go through the anatomy of the human body, especially the muscles and the bones and the arteries and nerves and everything, is called Zygote Body 3D Anatomy Online. It's a free program and it allows you to just adjust the actual level of what you want to see, muscular system, organs, bones, lungs, nervous system, all kinds of stuff into with this little slider over here. Super helpful. So we'll go with the muscles right now so we can talk about the rotator cuff. And this is completely free, so you can feel free to go along. I'll link the link in the video so you can follow along. But let's go ahead and dive in. So our first stop here is going to be along the shoulder here. So we can kind of visualize the shoulder here, and to visualize the rotator cuff, we're going to have to hide some muscles because they are deeper. So this big upper trap here, we can hide it by clicking this little eyeball down here. So hide that one. We'll hide the big deltoid over here, which we'll go over in another video. All right, so here we can visualize our first couple rotator cuff muscles. So here is our scapula to orient ourselves. This is our shoulder blade muscle that we talked about. And so in the back side of the scapula here, we can actually focus on it like this. We can look at all angles here. So here's the spine of the scapula. Here's the medial border, lateral border, glenoid cavity, superior angle, inferior angle, and then we'll draw attention to right here's the suprascapular notch. We'll come back to that in a bit. So we will go around, let's go over the muscles. All right, so our first one along the way is the supraspinatus, which is located right here. We can focus on it right here. So it is located on the top almost, so it originates in the suprascapular fossa, named appropriately, supra being above, spinatus meaning spine of the scapula, so right above the spine of the scapula sits the supraspinatus, making sense. And it originates right here in the supraspinatus fossa of the scapula, coming over to attach on the greater tubercle of the humerus. And its other action, along with the rotator cuff holding the whole shoulder in its socket, is the first 30 degrees of shoulder abduction, or bringing your arm away from your body. So very important. Innervated by the suprascapular nerve. Alrighty, next rotator cuff muscle here is our big one on the back. Right here is the infraspinatus. This is originating in the infraspinatus fossa, infra meaning below, spinatus meaning spinous scapula, and coming over here to wrap around the posterior aspect to attach to the greater tubercle of the humerus, right there. And this is also responsible for external rotation of the shoulder, also innervated by the suprascapular nerve. Here is our little guy, the teres major. This is the teres major, and he is originating on that lateral border of the scapula, and then coming around to attach on the back side of the humerus, just like the infraspinatus on that greater tubercle.
And if that muscle shortens, same thing with the supraspinatus or the infraspinatus, is that it produces external rotation of the shoulder. So that's another one of our rotator cuff muscles. This one is innervated by the axillary nerve. Alrighty, and then our last rotator cuff muscles on the front side. I'm going to have to hide the pec major, hide the pec minor, hide the serratus anterior, which we'll go over in a future video. I'm going to zoom in just slightly, and you can visualize it right here, and here is our subscapularis. So as you can see, it is posterior, but it sits on the anterior aspect, or in the front of the scapula, right? So it attaches on the medial border of the scapula, but on the anterior aspect of it, not the posterior aspect of it like the infraspinatus and teres major. So this muscle is literally sitting right in between the scapula and your rib cage. Okay, and so it starts there, and then it goes around and inserts on the lesser tubercle right here, the humerus. Has a very broad tendon here, and it's innervated by the upper and lower subscapular nerves. And the producing action is internal rotation. This is the only rotator cuff muscle producing internal rotation of the shoulder. Before we end the video, I do want to draw your attention to a specific bony prominence that's actually super important clinically here. So we'll focus on the scapula. If we come here and we zoom in slightly, I want to talk about this little notch right here. This is called the suprascapular notch. And an important nerve and artery run through here, corresponding to the suprascapular nerve and the suprascapular artery run through that notch. And so if we see, let's look at our nerves here. We're going to hide the infraspinatus real quick. And here we can see our nerve and our artery kind of linking around here. This little notch groove is called the sphenoglenoid notch. Kind of makes sense by the spine and the glenoid cavity of the scapula wrapping around. So let's focus on, let's do the suprascapular, and these have the same name, suprascapular nerve and suprascapular artery. So we'll focus on the suprascapular artery first. We can focus on this guy, and we can visualize it. We'll zoom in slightly. And this right here is our suprascapular artery, kind of coming around town, going right by the suprascapular notch. Important structure here is, let me hide the supraspinatus too so we can visualize it. This structure right here, the superior transverse ligament, or the transverse ligament of the supraspinatus, or the suprascapular notch. Now, the artery and the nerve typically go, the artery travels above the ligament, and the nerve travels below the ligament. The way I remember this is Army over Navy. And not to offend anybody who is part of the Army or Navy, but that is kind of how I remember it. So, Army, meaning that the suprascapular artery here travels above the transverse ligament of the suprascapular notch. And then the corresponding suprascapular nerve, and we can visualize it here again, travels under that transverse ligament of the suprascapular notch. So Army over Navy. Okay? And like we said, the suprascapular nerve innervates the supraspinatus that sits right here, and the infraspinatus that was sitting right here. And we can see it arcing around right there, arcing around the sphenoglenoid notch. So just something to keep in mind. And those are kind of the main nerve innervation and artery supply of these major rotator cuff muscles. But yeah, that is kind of what I wanted to go over today. Thank you for tuning in to this video. And I hope that helps, and I hope you learned something. And I'm the PT guy, educating you on God's wonderful creations. See you in the next one.